Welcome to Recross the Paths. My name is Cade. My guest today is the illustrious Dr. Parker Lamascus. Welcome.
Hey, Cade. Glad to be here with a fellow Okie, shooting the breeze and talking about Cube.
Absolutely. Or we could talk about Oklahoma too, I suppose, but I don't know how much there is to talk about
Oh, there's
necessarily.
so much. When's the last time you had Braum's ice cream?
Okay, no, now we're in the real talk mode already. Brahms is still my favorite restaurant, I think, to go to
Good,
anymore.
as it should be. Yeah, I haven't had Braum's in probably a year at this point. The last time we were in town to visit family, my partner made sure that we went to Braum's to get breakfast and also fries at the same time. Yeah, it's good stuff.
So Brahms has this cool idea where all of their stores, I believe, are within 300 miles of their primary dairy farm.
Yeah,
So it's like you can't get it outside of that area because they want everything to be fresh. And I don't know, maybe I'm just an old person now, but I am really into that.
I also really like it. And the lore that I've heard is that one reason for that is so that their drivers can drive to the furthest location and then make it back home in time for dinner.
I like that. That sounds very Oklahoman, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. It's
Gotta
good
make
stuff.
make it back.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, no, you're right. There is plenty we could talk about by way of Oklahoma, hoping that we're able to cross paths either in or out of the state at some point.
hmm
But folks will probably not know you because of your Oklahoman prowess as much as they will recognize you as the editor of Lucky Paper from some of your writings on various topics of cube and magic through that channel.
Yeah. It's been a real treat to work with Lucky Paper, Andy and Anthony and Jet for several years now. I did a count in November, and I think I'm on article number 50 for the site, which is incredible. A lot of those are just set reviews, and just data analysis with a little bit of commentary, more so than a full fledged article. But still, it's been a fun ride.
Well, you say just data analysis like that's some sort of throwaway thing, right? Like there's a lot that goes into capturing and collating that kind of work.
Yes, that's true. The joy of programming is that I don't have to do the same math every time. So that part is somewhat solved, luckily, and that means that I can spend most of my time just finding out what's new with the data set. So as far as my lift as the author, I find them to be a little easier to write. But yeah, it does build on a lot of programming and that kind of thing.
Do you have types of articles that you prefer to write or that you enjoy to write? Because I know you cover a lot of ground.
Hmm. I love to write really indulgent theory think pieces. Of course, then I read my own writing and I'm like, boy, this is terrible. I can't not just terrible, but even a greater sin in writing, which is boring. Um, and so those take a lot of effort to really refine, kind of trim away the fat and make sure that they're a pleasure to read, not just an info dump of cube theory. But even more fun than that has been the few times where I've gotten to kind of indulge my Hunter Thompson and, be much more subjective as an author. One example was a tournament report of CubeCon number 2. That one was really fun because I really just got to like flex my authorial voice to a new space, and really explore that. It was really fun.
Yeah, and there's something in a way that probably links that a little bit more to the science. Like the data is all there as a science, but then how you present it as the art.
Absolutely.
One of the ones that people may have latched onto pretty well was about trivia checks. Can you speak a little bit to that concept?
Yeah. So a trivia check is, if I remember my own writing well enough, a a decision in Magic that is not revolving around strategic decision making, but instead hinges completely on memorized rules. For instance, like I have a humility in my hand and I have a battlefield of my creatures and my opponent's creatures. Is my humility going to help me or hurt me? And that is really not strategy. It's strategy if you have the rules memorized of how the humility layer interacts with, other power and toughness setting attributes. I don't know that, and I've been playing Magic for 10 years, and so I would have to call over a judge or like Google something on my phone before I could access the strategic layer of Magic. So yeah, that for me is a place where it's really easy to make complexity cuts and kind of like make up a lot of ground on a complexity budget by getting rid of rules trivia so that you can then reinvest that complexity in individually complex cards, sometimes a reader of a card. If you're not thinking about trivia, then you can think about the fun part, which is strategy for me.
Yeah, and I mean, in fairness, of course, most judges are also going to have to pull up what humility does and how it interacts
Oh,
with a
good. I'm
number of
so
things.
glad.
Uh,
It's not just me.
but no, to your point though, I think there's something valuable about, we use these terms like thought technology, but having a term that encapsulates some of what people experience when you look at cards and think there's a hidden layer of this that you can only learn by having already done it.
Yeah. And that kind of thing, some players really love that, but I myself and a lot of players that I've introduced to Magic have a reaction that's more like, no way, you have got to be cheating me with this humility business.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, this can't be real.
right. Or whatever the card interaction is. The article goes through a lot more of them, but like maybe relevant in the cube world would be like we're one of the few formats that plays uncards like topsy turvy. The first time that happened to
Sure.
me, I was like, this can't be real. Like you are not telling me the actual rules of like you're double time walking me. No way. Um, and like I had to be walked through my first topsy turvy turn by my opponent because I was like just so wrong on muscle memory of like what I was supposed to be doing. So, like I have that reaction of like, this doesn't seem fair. And I see that reaction in the faces of like the players that I'm teaching Magic or the players I'm beating with these interactions at Cube Night. So yeah, it's something that I try to design to avoid.
Yeah, the experience of having to like kind of sadly shake your head like, "Yeah, this is how this works. This is how I'm going to
Yeah.
grind you into the dust here."
Yeah, when I'm wincing as I'm resolving a card, it's not a good sign. Like that for me as a designer is like a clarion call of, hey, reconsider your priorities here.
So, in reading some of your writings and hearing when you're a guest on Lucky Paper Radio, it sounds like one of the things that you are most excited about is fostering accessibility in your own cubes and in your cube groups. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I do think accessibility is something I care a lot about. This is really informed by my local group in Philadelphia, where I now reside, all Okie extraction aside. In Philly, we've been playing weekly cube for going on 3 years now. The group has now grown to like we're firing 3 pods on a weekly basis. Um,
Wow.
it's really incredible to be a part of that community. Like I'm far from the only person responsible for growing this group and kind of laying those foundations. And so, everyone I play with is wonderful and builds a really great culture. But that means we're seeing a lot of new people. It's not just the same 24 people every week. There's a core of regulars who really carve out every Wednesday for this, but then a lot of people show up only every other week or even less frequently. And the skill levels vary so widely among this group. We have people who have been on the pro tour at some points, and then we have folks who I think only play Cube as their only Magic or are even learning Magic through Cube. And so one of my goals as a designer is to make sure those groups of people can sit down at a table, get to know each other through gameplay, and have a nice time.
So, in trying to engage with all of these players in a broad spectrum of skill and experience, what does that look like practically when you're putting a project together?
I think you're kind of laying the breadcrumbs for this already, but the reason that I wrote the trivia article is because of my group. Like, I wouldn't have been spending so much time thinking about trivia checks if it hadn't been for the weekly gameplay that I was, experiencing and playing. And so, when I design a cube for this group, and really I've only designed one cube for the group as it now exists, but that is very much bound up in eliminating trivia checks and essentially starting with a thesis of what does it look like to make a cube where every player, regardless of how long you've been playing Magic or how many cube drafts you have under your belt, where every player can access interesting strategic decisions from the very first match and from the very first pack of the draft.
Yeah, and I love that. And I wanted to ask about that question and one other that you have as a setup here. But the cube we are referring to, the breadcrumbs that I have laid for us, are going to lead us to Atavus. Would you mind giving us the elevator pitch of this project?
Yes. So if you were to sit down to draft Atavus, I would tell you something like this. Atavus is Latin for ancestor. And so this is my attempt to capture kind of an ancestral way of playing magic. That means that I want the bombs to be as cool as they look, to play as cool as they look. I want the build arounds to teach you how to maximize them right there on the card. And there will be filler in this cube, but it's killer filler. And so I hope you'll enjoy looking at it, even if you end up putting it in your sideboard.
I love that.
And then I will also mention just a logistical detail of like, this is a cube with rarity. There is one non land rare or mythic in each pack, and only one. There are rare lands, but only one rare spell.
So you noted that oh my goodness, now I'm blanking on the term. The root word for Atavus, that that this is something that refers to a trait that reappears after being lost.
Atavism, yes.
Atavism, yes. Is there any similarity to I know another cube project you curate is like the ship of Theseus, something that is completely changing over the time. Was that intentional to have two cubes named after products of change?
It was not, but now that I have a cube named Atavus, I'm seeing the atavistic tendencies in Theseus. And so there is a feedback loop going on there. And actually, my most recent Theseus change was to like cut a bunch of 2020s cards and add more 20 teens cards. So they might converge into the same list at some point, but I hope not.
No, we'll just say that this is a consistent design voice, Parker. I think that's the best interpretation.
Oh yeah, that's very generous of you.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack with this project that I really appreciate. You mentioned the question first about is there an environment that players of all skill levels can approach, and have a kind of an even playing field that way. I don't often see guiding questions as a setup for cube design. Could you speak to those two questions that you've anchored on?
Sure. So I've written a little bit about this in the overview of this cube, which I hope that my players will never read my overview. It's really like, gory details that I want to spare them and only show to other cube designers. But for me, that frames Atavus as an experiment. On a recent episode of Lucky Paper Radio, Zach Barish from WotC and my friend in New York discussed an iteration loop of bringing a theory to a playtest and then using the data from the playtest, or maybe a better phrase would be like the emotional reactions and the results of the games, using that to inform the hypothesis and kind of building that full feedback loop. And so this cube, like the shape of the cards, is really an attempt to answer this question in a definitive way and kind of maximize the experience posed by the question of immediate accessibility to like the strategic layer of this gameplay. I didn't really want to do half measures. In other words, like if I'm going to try and answer this question, I'd like to go as hard as possible. And if I found that I've overcorrected, then I can, triangulate from there. It's kind of like that saying where if you're an artillery sighter and your job is to target the artillery and you overshoot the first time, you better undershoot the next time if you don't hit it on target.
Yeah.
Otherwise you're not making big enough swings.
As a musician, I often hear the if you're going to make a mistake, make a big one. So,
Right.
you know,
And if you're sharp the first time, and it, then next time if you're not on pitch, you better be flat at least to show that you've made the effort.
this is one of those the comical reminder that I often give to my students, which is in music, if we had accuracy anywhere close to an athlete, we would all get fired.
Mm, indeed.
If I had a batting average in terms of my note accuracy, I would not last long.
Yeah, that's very funny. My choir teacher would tell us, "Be right or be silent," which was really stark stakes there. I
That's amazing.
I didn't have to be silent too often in his choir, at least. It wasn't until later that I got lazy.
Well, and how good that that's not a philosophy that we embrace in Cube.
Indeed. Yeah.
Well, so yeah, so jumping in and saying no half measures, we're not going to be too tender about trying to find our way into it. So trying to determine, is this even possible? I think the second question you had noted was, can you center basically on bluffing and counterplay as a key element of the game?
Hmm.
How did you lean into that? How do you test that kind of hypothesis?
So I broadly think that the most interesting part of Magic is the combat phase. The interplay of, okay, my opponent has two cards and two mana open. What are the attacks that I can make with the face up information on the board, and also this like cloud of probabilities of what's in their hand and what they might spend mana on?
I love that turn of phrase, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a little bit Schrodinger esque, right? Where until I have precise information about their cards, it could be many things. And if it's like, for example, white blue mana open in a cube like Theseus, let's say air quotes typical legacy cube, white blue mana could represent negate to get rid of my removal spell, or it could be path to exile or swords to plowshares, or a flash creature like a snapcaster mage, or if a third mana is open, then it gets even more absurd. Like now we're talking about,
Are we double spelling?
right, double spelling, flashing in larger creatures that can profitably block. And that's really hard if you haven't played the cube before. Like, is this a cube that plays Mana Tithe? Am I going to get blown out if I tap out? You don't know until it's gotten you once. And that could be for a new player. And I don't mean here a player that's new to Magic. I could mean like a player that has just never played this cube before. They've played other legacy cubes, but this is their first time in Philly, or it's their first time at this cube night or at this game store. And they're not sure that they really like the scene. And they're trying to read what is white blue mana. Well, if it's Mana Tithe and they didn't realize that was part of the rules of engagement, that could be an opportunity for, frustration or interpersonal friction or whatever. And so, what I have tried to do is say, okay, you might get got the first couple times in Atavus, but in game 2, how can I allow the players to see white blue mana and know what the cloud of probabilities looks like, know what is possible with that much mana open? And so, just to get really specific, in this cube, I heavily duplicate instants, particularly instants, because those are the things that really tax your previous memorization of the cube list. So white blue mana could be disenchant, it could be raise the alarm, and there's two copies of raise the alarm. So it could be, some flash blockers, but they're 1/1s. It's nothing too extreme. It could be a counter spell or a card draw spell. But the counter spells are all spell pierce or syncopate or essence scatter at 2 mana value at least. And so you begin to kind of map out, oh, if I have a non-creature spell that I'm hoping to cast at instant speed in combat, and my opponent represents white blue mana, I should be watching out for spell pierce, or I should be watching out for flash blockers from raise the alarm, but I don't need to worry about, flying flash blockers, and I don't need to worry about getting mana tithed.
There's no settle the wreckage here or something
Right.
like
There's no
that.
settle the wreckage. There's no wandering emperor, that kind of thing.
This is a really fascinating fix. And, when people talk about breaking singleton, they often mean, I'm doubling up on one or two things. And this looks like, up to 4 copies of some spells in some cases.
Yes. This was really an attempt to really dial in on fun combat interactions. Another thing I was able to do with non singleton that I am not often able to do in singleton designs is really tune the card by card lineups. So black's 1 mana combat trick is Disfigure and Undying Evil. Green has Giant Growth. Disfigure and Giant Growth lead to a really interesting head to head where they beat each other depending on who casts which one first.
Yeah.
And that is really fun. That is the fun part of Magic for me. And that's the thing that I want players to be able to access. So to do so, I triple up on each of those. And then, so kind of the second order effect is to signal my heavy singleton breaking. I added cards like Timberpack Wolf and Fairy Miscreant, cards which reference other copies of themselves so that players can kind of be clued into the joke as early as pack one of the draft. And so it's not just something that you're discovering mid game, you're also kind of building your intuitions for the rules of this format as you're drafting. So that way, hopefully, you can set yourself up for success.
I love that. And I know not every solution is quite so elegant, but being able to say, this is not something you have to necessarily even describe to players. But as soon as you see a card that references multiple copies of itself, you have to like intrinsically know, hey, there are going to be multiple copies of cards in this cube.
Yeah, I mean, like if I have to explain to players like a design rationale for adding the cards that I'm adding, I'm lost in the sauce at that point. At least in my group. The reality of like 3 pods on some of our cube nights is like I'm not even in the pod of my cube. Like I just hand it off to someone and I'm like, "Okay, see you in 3 hours." And I need to communicate to them how to run a draft of my cube in as few steps as possible.
Mm.
So, it's just if I can take all of that kind of crunchy design skeleton and sublimate it and make it subconscious for the drafters, that's what I'm looking for.
With some of the duplications, some of them at least are marked with different art on the Cube Cobra page. Is that intentional or is that just part of the process?
Hmm. I think there's one instance where the art was intentionally different, which is Borderland Ranger. It has a Jesper Icing art, which I really love, and also a Zoltan Boros art. So in that case, I was like, I like both of these. I'm not choosing just one. The rest might just be Cube Cobra defaults being weird.
Well, no, that's fine. I was just curious. I didn't know if it was
Yeah.
like, I try to, I know some people like to split their fetch lands that way. I believe Jake does that of Bodley and Fame. So I didn't know if that was intentional.
Yeah, it's something I lean more into in Theseus, but here, this is another kind of distinct goal of mine, but I was really wanting to celebrate the 2003 frame, I think it is, the kind of classic modern border design
Yeah.
prior to M15. And so, yes, I will vary the art if I get the choice, but I am trying to go for classic illustrations and recognizability here.
You mentioned being able to hand off the cube to somebody else to run potentially. One of the setup considerations is your rare slot in the pack. How do you
Mhm.
approach that?
Well, the cardboard box I keep this cube in has instructions on the inside of the lid. So,
That's good. I love that.
yeah, I was like, give you 3 bullet points on how to set this up. And so I hope it's fairly self explanatory in that sense. And then the other nice thing is, this is something you can explain as the drafters are shuffling together. And then you can walk away to your own cube draft. And after the draft starts, there's no complexity. Like once the packs are made, it's just magic.
I don't see humility in the list. Yeah, it looks like
Yeah.
you could display.
I mean, another part of like letting other people run this cube or like being as accessible as possible is that rules text like that or foreign language or secret layer arts that are a little bit unintelligible. I have a cube where I enjoy that kind of thing, but this is not it.
Have you found your players have responded well to this environment?
It's an extremely comfortable cube to draft for the first time. So I've drafted it several times with our group in person, and each time it's somebody's first draft of this cube. And within the draft phase, before they even reach deck building, people say, "Oh, I really feel like I have a plan. I feel like I understand what this cube is about." So that kind of thing is one measure of success for me, is that people feel confident within their first draft. And then a second measure of success is that this cube is really fast. So people are resolving games fairly quickly. When we have multiple pods, Atavus happens to be or has been one of the fastest ones to finish. And so that's a sign to me that, yeah, players just know what's going on. They're not bogged down, they're not overwhelmed. And I think that makes people feel like even if they didn't win their matches, that the cube is tractable strategically. And if they were to play again, they could improve. Even if this was your first night drafting the list, you can see that path of improvement for yourself. And I think that's really kind of the reaction that I was looking for.
Yeah, not as a value judgment, but has that felt different from some of the other things you've worked on?
Yes, the cube that I built before Atavus is a desert cube or partial desert, where you have to draft your basic lands. So that means bigger pack sizes, and it also means that the draft takes a long time, and then the cards are all heavily thematic and therefore unfamiliar, and so the rounds are also slow.
We're referring to Pulp Nouveau here, right?
Yes, and I enjoy that cube, but it does have those kind of downsides to the design. Yeah, this one resolves that, and I do think is easier to draft for your first time. Like Pulp Nouveau is fun for other reasons. It's a fun challenge, but at the end of the first draft, you might not necessarily recognize the path for you to improve during your next draft. It's just a little less tractable as an environment.
No, it's totally fair. And I think there is a value in having environments that you can engage with in a variety of ways. You don't want everything to be like, not everything has to be the most comfortable, like you said, the first go round.
Yeah, that's right. A cube can't be all things to all people. This one, I think, does have a little less depth. I've tried to address that by having more rares than are drafted at a single night. And so you could come back a second week, and I hope that, your picks will be recontextualized by the rares that you open, which are, when we're picking from all of Magic's history, it's quite possible to choose commons and uncommons that are stronger than the rares.
Mm,
I've tried
yeah.
not to do that. I've tried to make, well, with an asterisk, but I'm playing Baneslayer Angel here, and I want her to be as cool as she looks for somebody who doesn't know anything else about the cube. Baneslayer Angel looks sweet, and I want it to be the kind of card that drop all your prior picks and pursue if you're able to.
One quick thing about Baneslayer that I particularly love is that you mentioned your black removal suite there, like your instants that are
Hmm.
supposed to deal with that. None of those can engage with Baneslayer except for the very top end. So you have to find other clever ways to get around it with that.
That's right. You can well, actually, this brings up another like kind of pillar of this design, which is letting players kind of have hope even when they're losing. So let's say Baneslayer Angel is like destroying you in game 1. You can sideboard into Extinguish the Light, which is my kind of top end removal spell of choice. It is very intentionally chosen to not get a huge tempo advantage on Baneslayer Angel.
Mhm, mhm.
You could sideboard into Bone Splinters and maybe bring a couple extra token makers to mitigate that extra cost. You could sideboard into hand removal to like discard it before it can be cast. Or if you're green, you could bring in Broken Wings, which is a kind of plummet effect. And I'm hoping that these kind of obvious sideboard cards, Broken Wings in particular, but I also play some light, not color hate, but more like color strong dislike. Um, there's a copy of Fry, for example. So
Yeah, I was about to ask about those actually.
these things I am hoping are a tutorial for sideboarding. Cube is kind of different than Retail Limited in how important sideboarding can be. Like, I've played limited formats where my pool is so shallow that I wouldn't sideboard even if I could cast my spells in my sideboard. Like, my 23 main deck spells are my strongest spells, and it doesn't matter if you have a crazy bomb. I just have to like work with what I've got. And that means that cube sideboarding is actually like kind of a hard skill. It's hard to like know what changes will bring the most improvement to your deck. And so I'm kind of hoping to set down some paving stones on that path. Maybe not, completely pave over the walkway, but at least some stepping stones so that you can see, oh, I'm playing against a white blue deck. Fry is really good here in a unique way. And it's not Boyle. I'm not talking about like locking a player out of Magic. I'm talking about getting players mentally habituated to looking at their sideboard for contextually better cards.
Yeah, and you mentioned that as one of the goals too, that your mechanics also push that way. So using things like raid or bloodthirst that are going to incentivize, hey, do this post combat, or hey, cast these spells in this sequence.
Hmm. I have, I think, mentioned on Lucky Paper Radio before that raid is one of my favorite mechanics of all time because it teaches not only good deck building, like, how do I enable attacks for my creatures, but also teaches good gameplay where, like, oh, if I have a creature with a raid ETB, I should wait to cast it until second main phase. And that means when my opponent goes to cast Disfigure on my attacker, I have mana up for giant growth. And that kind of interplay is what I'm looking for.
You noted that you wanted to kind of celebrate the modern card frame or like that kind of era of play. Do you think of Atavus as a cube that's supposed to be nostalgic or just to feel nostalgic?
Hmm. That's interesting. Nostalgia is almost tangential to what I think about with Atavus because it contains a little more shade of like aesthetic than I've been thinking about with this list. When I think about atavism with this cube, a lot of that is mechanical. Like there's not many words per card in this cube. I mean, you know, that is a little bit of a simplification of what I'm looking for, but like I am looking for cards that are simpler to read, that don't require you to know the difference between fading and vanishing, or know what plot does without reminder text versus foretell without reminder text. These are things that I've seen before in legacy cubes, and like actually, frankly, at times have played in my own legacy cube. And I'm just at a point in my Magic career where like I'm not reading all that. Um, and so atavism is really, I think, talking about play pattern and mechanic. There is some nostalgia here because the cards which happen to like fit the bill are also cards that play well with the things that are nostalgic to me. And so that means a lot of Alara block and a lot of Return to Ravnica and a lot of Scars of Mirrodin. And so, yes, I have indulged in my own nostalgia a little bit with this project, but it didn't like that's not the reason for the cube, I suppose.
So then, what is the reason? Do you think it's for you? Do you think it's for others? A little mix.
This is a cube that is, yes, for others. Like, well, it's also for me, but like it's for me in the sense that I don't want to have to wince when I'm welcoming new people to my cube. Like, um, I want them to engage with this gameplay and have a good time and not waste too much of their night on this. One of the things that I've enjoyed most about this cube group in Philly is that we started to like do things that aren't Magic. We have a lot of cinephiles in the group, and so sometimes we'll play an afternoon draft and then we'll go watch a movie. And so I want a game that is fun, that is a place where we can all come together and speak this shared language through gameplay. But also that's not the point. The point is to like hang out with my friends. And so the cards which kind of invite you to obsess over them or like lose sleep over the rules text, like I want to have an alternative for that, an alternative to that. I don't know. I'm getting a little poetic here. It's
I'm here for it.
okay.
I mean, that's why I ask questions like that too.
Yeah.
So, Parker, if you'll indulge a little tangent, your doctoral thesis that you recently completed is on a tribocentering of metal oxide nanocrystals.
Hmm.
I have said some of those words out loud before just now. Um, but I really enjoyed reading at least the summary overview of what you're aiming for with that project. There was a phrase that I loved that you used there. You were describing kind of the advantages of one system over another, kind of like utilizing something different than the conventional approach. You were talking about the value of that approach, and the quote was, "But a lack of fundamental knowledge has hindered the adoption of that approach." Do you think there's an overlap in that sensibility in something like your professional field and something like designing cubes
Mm.
and games?
You know, before I answer, I just want to note that Narduar has struck again. Um, and yes, I do see some rhyming between science and magic. This idea of fundamental knowledge in science, you don't always need fundamental knowledge. You can always just like, I don't know, if you're trying to decide whether A or B is better, you could just synthesize both and test both, and then whichever one has the better results is like the answer. However, it'd be a lot cheaper and faster if you knew, if you could perhaps model with an equation, or if you knew from, the principles of chemistry, oh, I have a strong hunch that A will be better once we do the test. And so that can, with A and B, with just two choices, it's somewhat simple and it's just as fast either way. But when you're talking about a whole alphabet of choices, it would be really nice to have the fundamental knowledge to really, like, thin down the field before you do your testing. With Cube, I think a similar thing exists. In particular, when I first started designing Cube, I had almost no sense of rate of cards. Rate being like just how much stuff you're getting per mana you spend, whether that's power or toughness, or like the amount of cards you draw, or just the oomph of your cards. Patrick Chapin talks about this in Next Level Deck Building.
Hmm.
Anyways, like if you want to know more, that's a good resource. But I had no idea what rate was when I started Cube Design. That's kind of the equivalent of a lack of fundamental knowledge, because I would end up testing things and then have to say to myself, like, oh no, I thought this was a synergy, but it turns out when your +1/+1 counter payoff is Colonian Hydra, the opponent just dies before the counter text matters because it's an 8/8 trample for 5. So, like, that kind of thing. Or, I would say to myself, like, this is maybe facile, but like, oh, it turns out Swords to Plowshares is not a life gain payoff. It's just the most efficient removal spell ever printed.
but
Um,
but it's easy to look at that from a design perspective if you don't have some of those heuristics in place and go, well, this does say gain life on it.
Right. And like it's so easy to fall into that. And I'm not sure without those experiences I would have like recognized the need for fundamental knowledge. So, I think the journey probably matters more than the destination. And in fact, I find that cube design that's solely focused on rate and like quote unquote good cards just puts me to sleep. It's so boring. But some knowledge of rate and the ability to kind of analyze cards without ever playing them, that's really what it comes down to. Can I look at a card without ever playing it and say, this does or does not fit in whatever cube design I'm looking at? And so that was really helpful here. Like, I was able to kind of nail down which instance I wanted to play without purchasing the cards, and kind of go through several iteration loops just by myself with just the Cube Cobra, not the cards.
I think it's really funny how when we think about things like that, it almost always comes back to it depends. you know,
Yeah,
what like you can't just say, ah, well, yes, it's all the math, and you can't just say, ah, well, it's all the feelings, because the answer almost always lands somewhere in the middle.
indeed. Yeah, I thinking back to the phrase lack of fundamental knowledge.
Well, the way you phrase that, it sounds like if you only knew, like you would consider this differently.
Yeah. It is interesting. I'm not sure that I've applied my thesis to my cube in that way.
But it's just a phrase that captured me. I don't know so much about the properties of lubricants at an industrial scale, but
Hmm.
that idea of, boy, if I had this piece of knowledge, or if you had this piece of knowledge, you would engage with this problem differently. Was fascinating.
Well, I'm glad. I my thesis was partly an attempt to graduate more than it was an attempt to be profound. But yeah, if I had fundamental knowledge about this cube, it would almost rob some of the fun, actually. Like, part of the fun is discovering it. And I like that, kind of with my life circumstances, I had a little bit of fundamental knowledge to kind of kickstart my journey so that I wasn't having to iterate over and over and over again. I could kind of start halfway down the road. But part of the joy is in discovery, I think.
I absolutely agree with you. As you consider your work with Atavus or with any of your other projects, do you have advice that you've picked up along the way that you would want to share with other designers?
Hmm. Good cards are overrated. You should play the cards you like, and also don't listen to people's feedback. Um, yeah, like people will offer so much well-intentioned advice, and some of that well-intentioned advice boils down to I lost, and I think I should have won. So I guess that's part A. Part B, if you're grumpy, stay grumpy. Grumpiness is a valuable piece of design feedback. It's a way for your subconscious to tell you, I ain't reading all that, and that's bad design. Uh, so those are my advices. Be grumpy and ignore feedback.
That's my secret cap.
Yeah,
I'm always grumpy.
that's right.
Well, Parker, as we're turning toward wrapping up here, I get to ask one of my favorite questions, which is if you could have any card printed as a promo, what card would you pick and who would you have do the illustration?
This is a snap choice for me, Cade. My one of my favorite cards of all time is Curd Ape. This is
Oh, yeah. Kev
yeah,
Walker.
single red mana
Or sorry,
for a
Ken Meyer Jr.
well. Actually, you're anticipating me here.
Oh, no.
It's true. So Curd Ape is single red mana for a 1/1, and it gets +1/+2 if you control a forest. It does have wonderful Ken Meyer Jr. art, but because he is, I think what happened is he retained the rights to his artwork, and so it is expensive for Wizards to put that on Magic Online or on Magic Arena. And the second artist for Curd Ape is someone that Wizards doesn't associate with anymore. So for that reason, I think it's ripe for a reprint, and I think the man to do that reprint is Kev Walker. Um,
Good. That's hilarious.
yes, serendipitous. Kev Walker is not just a magic artist; he's also done comic book art. I'm a little bit of a Star Wars fan, and he did ink the series Doctor Aphra recently. Just a really charming original Star Wars character, and I say that to mean that he has a style that is illustrative and heavy on the lines in some cases, but also has a really masterful use of color. I've really enjoyed his work ever since I saw Assault Strobe for the first time. It was in a bulk box that I got at a local, I don't even remember the name of the store anymore, but it was a local hobby shop, just like repacked cards. There was 300 copies of Sky Ill School and one Assault Strobe. Yeah,
Yeah, that sounds correct.
yeah, it was about right. Which is why I love Scars of Mirrodin so much. So many Sky Eel schools. But yeah, Kev Walker, I think, comes across really well at the scale of a card. He has a great sense of humor as well. And Curd Ape is a little bit of an absurd card because it's just a monkey that's like going to punch your face in. So yeah, I think that would be the perfect card and artist pairing.
Well, that was an amazing slip of the tongue. I really did not mean to do that.
No, I'm so
Uh,
glad you did.
well, yeah, and Kev Walker has, like as you noted, it's not quite line work, but these really strong shapes, and he's
Hmm.
done a number of iconic cards. So it would be cool to see him come back to Card 8.
Yes.
Well, Parker, this has been a joy for me, and I'm so grateful that you've taken your time to share so much of this with us. If folks want to follow up on Atavus or Pulp Nouveau or the Ship of Theseus or any of your other projects, where should we point them?
Yeah, I am on Blue Sky. My handle is parker at luckypaper.co. I'm also on Discord. You can find me in the Cube Talk Discord as Parker. And my cubes, I hate to say this, but it's not my name. My username is Land of Mordor, which, yeah.
I've heard of that land.
Yeah, I picked my first username in seventh grade and then stuck with it well into my adulthood. So
That's perfect. Well, again, I'm so grateful for just this chance to get to spend some time hanging out and talking a little bit about this. But you are always a treat to be around, and I am looking forward to the next time we get to connect.
Kate, thanks so much. I appreciate your curiosity and passion that you bring to this project. So it was really great to talk.
I was gonna note, I don't imagine this makes the cut, but my wife's name is Valerie, and the nickname that she kind of picked up over the years that I use for her is a Valrog of Morgoth.
Oh, awesome.
So,
Yeah.
so that's one that I find myself, just if you're hollering around the house, Valrog is the call.
I'm not sure how much this falls into your, family friendly standards, but in college, there was a meme in our friend group of an app called Places I've Pooped. And, it's you compose a tweet from the porcelain throne. and that's pretty much the whole conceit of the app. Um, my handle, after much consideration, was the Balrog, but
Oh,
with
that's
a little
so
bit of a
good.
spelling, yes. And I continue to think about that maybe more often than I should.
That's awesome. Do you remember what the app was called?
Places I've pooped.
Oh, that was the name of it. Okay. See,
Yeah.
I'm already thinking of like could have been called Info Dump or Lore Dump.
That's really good. Man, they should have worked harder.